Hello, everyone. Today is Friday, October the 12th, 2018. I had a dream on 9/15 of this year, 2018, that I would like to share with you. I dreamed about a lady that was telling me about the Atlanta housing market. Um, she was talking about apartments, not houses, apartments, and how it was very hard to get an apartment. There were some apartments that were desirable, and she said that people were squatting outside within the complex in order to be the first to move into the next available unit. Okay, it was like they were going to run. So even the rich people, even people with money, had to wait to move into these apartments to live there. So they were running the average people out. They were pricing the average people out of the more desirable apartments. So there was some other stuff going on when I was having this conversation with her. But this woman, she looked Hispanic. She just looked Hispanic to me, but she was American. And she said also that the police were there to keep people moving because of the squatting. People were squatting within these complexes so that they could be the first person to, hit the rental office if an apartment became available. So the police were there to keep people moving because what I pictured was like people like living on the sidewalks in tents in this apartment complex because there just was a shortage of apartments. So she said the police had made her move. They made her move along because she was squatting too. They had money. They were willing, people were willing to rent the apartments, but there just were not enough apartments. And the biggest competition in the rich people were, buying people out of the nicest places. But I mean by buying people out is that, if apartments are scarce, if the supply of apartments is low, then rents will go up. And by low, I mean compared to the amount of people who want to rent them. If you have more people wanting to rent, then people will charge more for rent. And when the rents go up, the more money you have, the bigger advantage that you have. So the poor people were getting pushed out of the places. The poorer people were getting pushed out of places. And the rich people were getting the more desirable. I didn't say rich, I said people with money. So she got moved along. The police came and made her move her little squatting spot. But I did not get run away from the squatting. The police didn't bother me. And it was because I had some sort of favor or advantage. And I wrote that it may have had something to do with God, why I did not get moved along. Okay, apartments. I've had, like I said, I had that dream on September 15th, which it is now almost a month ago that I had that dream. And I knew that I should make that right away. So this is what is going on. In 2016, January or February of 2016, I was wanting to buy a house in a certain Midwestern city. So I began to, I don't know how I got in touch with this real estate agent. I don't know where this woman came from. I can't think of how I found her. But anyway, she was just a few years older than me, probably between 5 and 10 years older than me. And she and I really just clicked. And we ended up talking about Obama and everything. Like I said, this was like early 2016. So he was still the president of the United States at that time. So I told her that God showed me that he was the Antichrist. And then she started asking me questions because apparently she had like some little buzz about the New World Order. And like she'd heard something and she asked me, and I sat and broke it all the way down. And I could tell that that woman was scared. I could tell that woman was nervous, as everyone was. Everyone was nervous during that time. Even my family took me more seriously back then because just the climate, there was just something in the air where you could just smell the martial law like you can smell rain. But, for that very reason, they backed off. They absolutely backed off. They put Trump in office to deceive people into thinking, look, all right, everybody go home. There's nothing to see here. There's nothing to see here. Just another peaceful transition of power here in the Western world. Everybody go home. We have a president. But it was all a deception. So God showed me that he was going to win that election in, I think it was in May, maybe March or May, some M month. And that people were going to think that they had dodged a bullet. People were going to think they had made a better choice and that they had taken the necessary step to undo all the damage that Obama had done, and that they were going to send the country back in a better direction. But it was not going to happen. It was not going to happen, and people were not going to turn back to God, and everything was just going to continue on like it was. Trump was not. I think the name of the video was "Trump Will Not Save You." So I'll link that video in the description box. So people had asked me, what do you think about Trump? What do you think about Trump? What do you think about Trump before that? Has God ever showed you anything about Trump? And I would always say, no, I don't think nothing about Trump because God's never shown me anything about Trump. I don't follow politics. I don't watch the news. I don't know what the rhetoric is. But the only opinion that I had was my own personal opinion, which was shock and disbelief that that Americans were gullible enough to elect or to even consider a reality television star as a serious presidential candidate. I thought of Trump as a pure clown, and I'm not exaggerating. I did not think that anyone would consider him a viable presidential candidate or someone. I just couldn't believe it. So as he kept coming through the Republican ranks and then eventually became the Republican nominee, I was flabbergasted. I thought it was going to be Jeb Bush. That was my own personal thinking. That's why I don't come on here with my opinion, because my opinion in things that God has not told me anything about is just as worthless as everybody else's opinion who's coming on here talking about Obama is not the Antichrist, okay? Putin is the Antichrist and so-and-so is the Antichrist. No, he's not. Y'all better go pray and say out of your mouth what God is saying out of his mouth. Other than that, just say it's your opinion. And recognize that your opinion means absolutely nothing. So I didn't say, I didn't make any videos about Trump. I didn't mention Trump. I didn't think he was a viable candidate. When he became the Republican nominee, I was shocked. And I didn't think anything about the election between Hillary and Trump because my personal feeling was that Obama was going to declare martial law and stay in office because I knew for a fact from God Almighty that he is the Antichrist. And at some point, he is going to want to sit on his throne. But he couldn't do that at that time because, like that real estate agent that I had, too many people had been alerted by people, little old people like little old me and other little old people that were saying, I had a dream about Obama. He did this, he did that. He's the Antichrist. God said he's the Antichrist, 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 Antichrist. So people were watching. And my family members, I had them like, okay. Just like that real estate agent. She's thinking, okay, this is concerning. But when they elected President, I don't call him President Trump. When they elected the Donald, because that's how he was happy to be known before that, as the Donald. When they elected him, and my latest dream was that, I think it was the latest one, but it was pretty recent and current, that he will be homeless and hated. He will leave office in shame, in utter shame. Okay, that's what's going to happen to President Trump. For those of you who still have not been able to let go of him being your savior, your Cyrus, that God has given America reprieve. America is under judgment that will not be turned away. It will not be turned away. America is Babylon, and it will fall like Babylon. The 10 kingdoms that will be formed under Obama will hate the whore, and they will burn her and destroy her. The Babylon, they will hate her. The rest of the world is dreaming of the day when they can destroy the dollar, and with it, your way of life. Okay, enough of that. So they had to 86 the plans to declare martial law and stir up chaos, create riots, and declare martial law. Okay, racial riots, financial riots, just riots, a la Occupy Wall Street and hands in the air, don't shoot, all that nuttiness that was going on then was supposed to reach a fever's pitch, laying the foundation for Barak the Antichrist Obama to stay in office. But God, in his infinite wisdom, created such a fervor at that time of people waking up and sounding the alarm. But they came back with their counterpunch, which was to go ahead and let the election go through, to let people think that Trump is going to come in and save the day. And look, it's bought another 2 years for them. And people are more deeply asleep than I could have ever imagined. They could be. So Trump is a false light. That's what God showed me. And that he also is going to serve to further stir the chaos and have people cry out for the leadership of Barack Obama, in which he's leading them all to the sides of the pit where he will be going himself in due time. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. So we will be patient as we wait on that. All right, so I met that real estate agent. She and I talked about Obama, blah, blah, blah. And at that time, I was going to buy a house. we looked and looked and looked and looked and looked and looked and looked. And during all that looking, like I said, her and I, we just really hit it off, and we talked. She told me all about her, and just very personable. Our relationship got very personal. And then God told me that there was a real estate bubble. This is January or February of 2016. So what I actually saw, I had a dream, and I actually saw a bubble, and inside it was 30%. So that's how much God showed me that the homes that I was looking at were inflated by. They cost too much by 30%. So that if I were to purchase one of those homes, I would be overpaying by 30%. And when this bubble would burst, if you were in a lot of house, even if you weren't in that much house, that is disastrous. Let's look at why that is horrible. You do not want to buy property in a housing bubble, which all areas of the country, pretty much, except for those that never really recovered from the first bubble, which happened to take place when Barack Obama was elected president, which supposedly is what triggered the financial collapse of 2008, which he promptly came in and gave away $750 billion that will never, ever be paid back. That last $750 billion, $750 billion, guaranteed, along with all the other things that he did, guaranteed the collapse of the United States. An amount of money that will never, ever be paid back, that is accruing more interest right now as we speak than we could ever pay back. So we're done. For many reasons. That's just one of them. We're done. So had I purchased property in that market, let's say I purchased a house that was, I'm going to use numbers that will allow for easy math. Let's say I purchased a house that costs $300,000. I could not afford a house that costs $300,000. We're just using those numbers. But let's say I could, and I did. If that house were overpriced by 30% or anything near it, that would mean that the real value of that house would be approximately $200,000. So the effect is, that's what they're running around saying, people are underwater in their house, which means you effectively cannot sell your house unless you happen to have that amount of money that you're underwater. Like, say, if I bought that house in 2016, which is 2.5 years ago now, had I purchased a house in that major metropolitan area for $300,000, in a little while, which is happening as we speak, the values are falling. The bubble is going to pop. The house is not worth $300,000. For many reasons, it costs $300,000, which we could get into, but I want to get to the point. But it's really only worth $200,000. That other $100,000 is an artificial value. It is a value that exists in people's heads. It is just a number that people are willing to sign for and in a loan, but not the real actual value compared to what wages are in the area, to what people can actually buy, considering what the interest rates are. Because interest rates are huge when you talk about buying a house. When interest rates are high, a person that can't afford a $300,000 house really can't afford a $300,000 house. But when interest rates are really low and you're basically your payment is much lower because there's a lot less of it going toward the interest. When you first buy a house, all you're paying is interest. They're just if your house payment is $1,000, then you may be paying $50 going towards your principal, and all the rest of it is interest. And that's at the beginning of your 30-year loan. Your interest. And as the years go along, your payment stays the same. You pay that same $1,000. But say this is the percentage of interest compared to how much principal you're paying. Not, 99 to 1. And then as the years go along, it goes like this. Then they meet in the middle. Somewhere along the line, you're paying half and half. And then as you get toward the end of the loan, you're hardly paying any interest and you're rapidly paying off the house. So that's the kind of stupid math that they do in order to maximize the amount of money that they're able to suck out of you while you are paying for that house. Because most people don't keep their house for 30 years. And also, if you happen to default on your loan and you're unable to pay for your house, you still owe them the maximum amount of money because in the beginning, you haven't been able to pay that house down very much. So if at any point anything goes wrong, it's just an advantage for them all the way down the line in every way that you could think of. And they do it all with math. That's why I say, do away with all this calculus and all these confusing things that they're trying to teach kids. Teach them to read, to write, and to do arithmetic, because that's where the devil is killing people, because they just flat out don't know what 7 times 9 is, and they can't just do it off the top of their head because they can't do long division, because they don't know decimals and percents and long division, and because they're dependent on calculators, and because they just don't know what they're signing anymore because we're dumbed down and greedy. So had I purchased in that market, I would now be the proud owner of a house that is about to go down drastically in value. Yet I still would owe, if we're using a $300,000 house, if the house were overpriced by 30%, which they are, now all of a sudden my $300,000 house is only worth $200,000. That's all I can get for it. And if you fall on the ice and hurt your back, if you get laid off, if you have relatives move into your house, if you, anything that happens that changes your financial situation, your job closes down, whatever happens, you get cut to part-time, anything happens, your husband loses his job, your side business, maybe you babysit on the side, suddenly you lose that income. Anything that happens, if you're in a house that you really can't afford, anything that happens, now you can't afford your house. If you have a house that's expensive, you could sell and buy a less expensive house. But you can't do that if you have a $300,000 loan and a $200,000 asset, which is the house, you sell the house, you have to have $100,000 plus closing costs in order to get out of that house. Now you just lost your job or whatever just happened. You don't have it. So what do you have to do? You stay in the house as long as you can and you lose the house. Okay, some people say, oh, you can try to short sale. While I was trying to buy in 2009, I looked into some short sales, but the process was so laborious to buy these short sales from these people because the people were trying to make as much money as they possibly could so that they would minimize what they owed the bank. And the bank wasn't agreeing to it because the bank didn't have to agree to it. A lot of these loans were subsidized by the federal government. The banks had no incentive to negotiate with these people. They were going to be able to write off the losses that these people had anyway. They would rather let the house go into foreclosure than to approve the short sales. So it was nearly impossible working with the short sale. So the choice that a person has to make when their house has been the victim of an economic bubble is either you have the money to make up the difference, which the average American, of course, does not, even if it's $30,000. Even if you bought a $100,000 house that you can now only sell for $70,000, who has $30,000 plus, 6 to 8% for closing costs and other associated costs selling a house? Who just has that money on hand like that? Most people do not, especially if you've had some sort of a crisis that caused you to need to sell the house in the first place. So that stopped me dead in my tracks from buying a house. I said, okay, I knew the dream was from the Lord. I believed it. I'm absolutely not going to buy one of these homes. I believe that they are absolutely overpriced and, based on what I just dreamed, that's it. I'm not buying. So I stopped looking for a house, lost touch with the lady. I believe her name was Gail. Nah, that wasn't her name. So yeah, how does that relate to the dream that I just had on the 15th? First, in 2000, the first housing crisis, which went along with an overall economic crisis, global economic disaster that was narrowly averted on the backs of the American people to the tune of $750 billion. So what happened? Everything's going great. 2006, 2007, jobs are plentiful. Everybody's doing all right. 2008, this is what pushed everybody over the edge. People did get into houses that they really could not afford, that they were barely affording. And what happened? What pushed everybody over the edge was gas prices. Suddenly, it nearly doubled what it costs to put gas in your tank. And if you drive a lot, that was a lot of money. And when you're barely in your house and all of a sudden you have this new bill, that's $200 to $300 a month. That could be enough to make you say, okay, now I can't afford my house. I'm going to try and sell my house. So when more people started trying to sell their houses, then the fact that the houses were overpriced became very obvious. So in order to sell, what do? They start dropping their price. If my house costs less than the house next door, and they're substantially the same, you're going to buy my house. Okay, so more and more people need to start buying their houses, selling their houses. So now all of a sudden you have more houses for sale than you have people that want to buy them. Prices plunge even further. Now people who really are desperate to get, now this is happening as a domino all over. Now people who are desperate to get out of their house can't sell it because now the value is dropping. Because if your neighbor has just slashed his price by, $50, $60, $100,000, your house is cheaper too. Because what they go based on is called comparables for what houses around you are selling for. That's what your house is worth. I don't care what you paid for it. I don't care what you think in your mind. I don't care how much better you think your house is than the next person's. Whatever your house or whatever the houses around you are selling for, that's what your house is worth. It's got nothing to do with what you owe the bank. So that's what began to happen. People start slashing their prices. And then all of a sudden, people couldn't get what they wanted for their house. And prices just start dropping all over the place. Then people who needed to sell now can't sell because they don't have that money to bring to the table, which is the difference between what they owe the bank and what they could now get for the house. Now the house goes into foreclosure. Now the house belongs to the bank. The bank has to take the house back. So what does the bank turn around and do? Now the bank turns around and sells the house, puts the house back on the market as a foreclosure. Now this person who didn't have the money to pay for the house any longer now stops making their mortgage payments, and they start tearing the house up. They start letting the dog poop in the house. They abandon the house. People break in the house. They take the furnace. They take the AC. They take all the fixtures, bust the walls up. And these houses are just a dirty, filthy mess. And they've been empty 2-3 years. And now, not only is your house not worth as much because your neighbor is slashing his prices, but now these properties that have been lost to the bank are now called a distressed property. One, the bank is anxious to get rid of it, so they're going to sell it for a lower price. Two, they have to sell it for even a lower price because it's going to take money for the person who buys it to fix the house back up to where it's livable. And that can be very significant. So, this is a lesson that I learned very well in the first economic crisis, which was highlighted by a stock market crash. It wasn't just the housing market. They try to blame it on all that, but all of this stuff was synchronized and choreographed to rob you of your home, to rob you of the ability to own a home, and to also raid people's IRAs, to raid retirement accounts, because all these things were invested in the stock market. So when all that stuff crashed, and that's what people saying, oh, I suddenly lost 30-40% of my retirement. That's a story of people who are older, in their 60s and 70s, working right now, that would have otherwise been retired, but their retirement savings was wiped out in that whole 2008-2009 fiasco, which Obama supposedly saved us from, but we never ever climbed out of it. All it was debt. All it was debt. He introduced stimulus packets, stimulus spending into the economy, which was just future tax money. That's all it was. It's all still just debt. And since it's not real economic growth, it's just people still having the penny no. people still having the ability to spend money that they don't have, which just gets you into deeper trouble. So if if you can't pay your bills, you're broke, you got nothing in the bank, you can't pay any bills, and I come along and loan you, $10,000. Now, not only do you have those bills, but now you owe me $10,000 and I'm charging you interest. So borrowing doesn't get you out of trouble. The only thing that gets people out of trouble is a real changes in the economy to bring back real jobs that serve the community, of things that people actually really need, not garbage spending and speculation that we don't need, that doesn't really grow the economy. That's a whole nother discussion. So 2009, they had this, one of the other things that Barack Obama did was to introduce something called the first-time home buyer credit, which I believe it was like $7,000 a credit. You would, when you filed your taxes the next year, if you purchased a home and you had either never purchased a home or it had been 3 years since you purchased a home, you would be considered a first-time home buyer. And that was supposedly to stimulate the economy. Now remember, in order to give everybody this $7,000, all you're doing is sticking that $7,000 on the back of our huge tax bill, on the back of our huge debt, which we're still dragging around to this day, the majority of which we owe to China. So, $7,000. So what that did was that got a lot of people who were not going to buy houses in 2008, 2009, and I'm not sure how far along that went. What years was that first-time home buyer credit? Let me see. So the first year was in 2008. Oh, it was $7,500. Okay. This is the site IRS.gov. This is official government site. You may be able to take the first-time home buyer credit if you were an eligible buyer who purchased a home as your primary residence in 2008, 2009, or 2010. Eligibility varies depending on the year of your purchase, and there are specific benefits. Okay, so I did that in 2009. So in 2010, when I filed my taxes in April, I received that credit. Now, you don't actually get all of that money unless you have all your tax satisfied. If all your tax is satisfied, then you get the rest as a refund. So I don't remember how much, whatever my tax refund was that year. So, but in 2009, in September of 2009, when I purchased, it was a condominium, God told me, I was looking all over the place again, because I don't know, I just don't pull the trigger quick on that kind of thing. So I looked and 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 looked. And God told me where to buy. I heard in an audible voice, McNeil Farms. I don't know if I was asleep or if I was awake, but I heard McNeil Farms. And that was this one place that I had looked where they had these condos that, like, my totally least favorite place I looked that I did not want to buy. But I knew for a fact that that's what God wanted me to do. So I reluctantly like this was the least desirable place that I wanted to buy. But in obedience to the Lord, I bought this place, and I bought because foreclosures had begun to hit there, but they were not done because the housing crisis moved across the country. It started on the West Coast, but by the time it got to our area, so by the time it was had already hit the bottom in other places, the prices had already bottomed out. It was still falling off the cliff where I was. And I didn't know that. So they put out this stimulus, part of his stimulus package. How much was his stimulus package? Sick of this man. Obama's stimulus package. See, we forgot about all this stuff. And they count on that. They know they know that our memories are short. So what was his stimulus? Okay, how could I have forgotten? The American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009. Okay, so all this home buyer credit and all that stuff was all part of that. Boy, these people, they so slick. Okay, nicknamed the Recovery Act, was a stimulus package enacted by the 111th Congress and signed into law by President Barack Obama in February 2009. So, that was one of his first acts in office. In response to the Great Recession. This is on Wikipedia. Okay, so they're calling it now the ARRA's primary objective was to save existing jobs and create new ones as soon as possible. Other objectives were to provide temporary relief programs for those most affected by the recession and investment in infrastructure, education, health, and renewable energy. They always got to stick that in there. The approximate cost of the economic stimulus package was estimated to be $787 billion at the time of passage, later revised to $831 billion between 2009 and 2019. The rationale was based on Keynesian economic theory that during recessions, the government should offset the decrease in private spending with an increase in public spending. This is socialism, in order to save jobs and stop further economic deterioration. Okay. So now this is separate and apart from the hundreds of billions of dollars that he gave to banks. Just gave it to them, to big banks that were too big to fail. So this man spent us into oblivion. And he had only been president a countable number of hours. All right, so part of that was to get people buying houses. Now, first of all, it's just dumb. It's dumb. If you can't afford something, getting $7,000 is to buy it is still dumb. And all you're doing is shuffling people around because everybody still has to live somewhere. So now you have all these new buyers that are willing to buy homes. All at the same time, let's see. So the people who had not been in their home or who had been in their homes more than 3 years, they have two incentives. One, they can also get this tax credit. And two, you have people with this tax credit that are willing to buy their homes. So people are going to like move up in house, move around. So you're just shuffling the same amount. You're just shuffling the same money around. Who makes out though? The banks. Why? Because they make money whenever they loan money. It didn't improve anybody's situation. And plus, in 2008, 2009, and 2010, prices were still sliding. The house that I ended up buying, that I did obey the Lord, and I bought, lost 40% of its value. I was out of town working, and I would look back on the, websites like realtor.com and whatever, and I would see as all the foreclosures continued to pop up. Ohio was hit very badly. It was one of the hardest hits, like in the top 10 of states with foreclosures. And they just continued. They were backed up for years. It took the courts years to get to all the people that were foreclosed on their homes. So I know people that lived in their house a year or two before they were actually thrown out. I personally know people who were not paying any mortgage, and it literally took the sheriff 2 years to show up to their house because the courts were so backed up with bankruptcies. So now, had I bought the house that I wanted to buy, what I had my little eyes set on, nice, new, this or that, and the prices continued to drop like they did, I would have been in a disaster. Let's say I would have bought a $200,000 or $250,000 house in 2009. And that house went on to lose 30-40% of its value, which they did. They did, because the housing market in Ohio was flooded with foreclosures. Now, they're not supposed to use foreclosed properties or distressed properties of any sort when they figure the value of your house. If someone is going to buy your house, they have to get an appraisal. The bank that's going to loan them money is going to order an appraisal. So as part of the reforms that they so-called instituted to keep those banking disasters from happening again, with them just loaning way too much on a property and more than it's worth, supposedly to prevent bubbles, which we're in one right now, a new one. In order to prevent that, they made the banks, they had to get totally independent appraisals. They had to send a random person that had nothing to do with the bank, out to give their appraisal, how much the property is worth, and send that to the bank, and the bank will not loan more than that amount. So, and they're not supposed to use all these foreclosures, which are the fault of the banks anyway. The banks are just dumping all these foreclosures. There's record number of foreclosures, and they're just dumping them back onto the market. And you cannot sell a foreclosure for as much money as you can sell a property that someone's been living in and taking care of, as one that's been empty for 2, 3, or 4 years. The property that I bought was empty, was foreclosed for 4 years, and it was a disaster. It was a mess. But it was so cheap compared to what they were asking for the properties around me that I went ahead and bought it anyway. Plus, God had told me to buy in this particular complex. He literally told me, McNeil Farms. And I'm like, no. But I did it. And I was so glad I did. Because I purchased that property for 40% less than what it was worth at the time that I purchased it. But it continued to slide. And it slid all the way down to what I purchased it for and kept sliding. Now, technically, it did not keep sliding. But by the time the bank comes along and is comparing your house to foreclosed properties that have slid 60, 70%, because not only has the overall market slid, but now this property is torn all the way up and nobody wants it, so they have to practically give it away. Plus, when you buy in a condo complex where the association fees are very high, it can also become harder to sell those properties. So now you have these foreclosures that no one wants to buy because the condo fees are so high. Why are the condo fees high? Because people are foreclosing. People are losing their property. The foreclosure rate inside that property was so high that they had to keep raising the HOA fees on the people that were actually paying. People faced with, do I pay my mortgage or do I pay these condo fees? They stopped paying their condo fees. So now the condo fees are high. Now the banks drop the price on the condo even lower because they want to get rid of this property, because as long as they're carrying this property, it stays on their books and they have to pay the condo fees. So it's just costing them way too much money. It was easier for them to just dump it on the market at a cheap price, which further decreases the amount that you can get for your house, even though your house is not supposed to be compared to a foreclosure because they're two totally different types of properties. Like properties should be compared to like properties, but they did not do that. They absolutely do not do that. When foreclosures flood the market, they affect overall prices, and that's all there is to it. So when it came time that I sold that property in 2014, the prices still had not recovered. But because I obeyed the Lord, I was able to sell that property without bringing money to the table. I did, of course, lose money because the property was a disaster when I bought it, and I had to spend a lot of money to get it back to where it was nice. So I lost some of that money that I spent. What I mean by lost it is it was not recovered in the price that I was able to get when I sold it. So when I sold it, technically I made money, but I really didn't make money because that was just the money that I spent in the front end when I bought the property. So in that sense, I actually lost money because I spent more to fix it up than what I got as profit when I sold it. So technically, I still lost like $20,000. But it was money that I had already spent years before when I bought it. So it was better than being stuck in a house you can't sell, or having what a lot of people did. They tried to sell their house. No one would buy the house at the price they needed to sell it for because they owed it to the bank. So they just had to give up, let the house go. And that was life in Ohio back in 2009, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. That was life in Ohio. So when we get to 2016, and I'm thinking about buying that house, and God lets me know that there's a 30% bubble, I'm not buying. And I'm not getting caught out there like I did the last time to lose $20,000, which could have been a lot more. If I had bought a $200,000 or $250,000 property like I wanted to. Taking a 40% hit on a $200,000 property is $80,000. If I had bought what I wanted to buy, I would have still been recovering from the bankruptcy. or stuck in a house. So in 2016, when I got that warning, I did not do it. Okay, now, where are we now? Now we are at the point where that bubble is about to burst. The new bubble that the that the ARRA, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009, signed into law by Barack Obama in February of 2008, has all it served to do was pump up a new bubble. And like I said, a bubble is when something, basically it's when something is overvalued. People are paying prices for something that it really is not worth. And how do you pump up a bubble? You pump it up with money. You pump it up with debt. You pump it up with loans. If you're willing, it's just like the student loan bubble. Those kids could not be in the type of trouble that they are in with debt unless somebody was making money cheap. And you also saw that in this American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, they also had programs aimed at education. This is where Obama made so much more available in loans for kids to go into ill-advised career paths and educational programs for jobs that they don't even think out into the future. Does this job exist? Is this marketable? Is the market going to be flooded? Is this something that I should spend $150,000 on? And the answer is no. Now, if you really wanted to grow the economy, why give an 18-year-old that just got out of high school and didn't even do well $150,000 for him to spend on weed, clothes, and waste some of it on an education that he won't ever be able to use because the jobs just aren't there? When you won't loan a person that's maybe 28 that has learned their lesson, that would actually be a good place to invest, not even half of that. Like, they'll give a kid $25,000 in a heartbeat. You hear me? And I'm talking about a heartbeat. Some of the most ill-equipped children to handle college at this point in their lives because they're extremely immature. They have not thought about what they're going to do. They have not thought about, is this going to lead to a viable career? The future of this economy is not possible for you to predict. And you're grown and you've been out here in it, let alone you're 18. But they'll give an 18-year-old they'll give them $25,000, $50,000 a year. No questions asked. No questions asked. But a man that's trying to feed his family, who wants to start maybe a lawn care business, something there actually is a need for, or maybe he's a plumber, he wants to take on an apprentice, which is another young person that probably doesn't even belong in college. Everybody's not college material. Every job is not going to come from something that's in college. You're going to always need a plumber. You're going to always need a carpenter. You're going to always need, manual type things. And they're good jobs. There's nothing wrong with it. A man that just starts his own business out of his own creativity. Things that don't require college. These that don't require you to waste time nor money getting a worthless degree. But they won't loan that man $15,000. And he's a much better investment. He is far more likely to pay that money back, to actually create a job in the economy. But the point of the stimulus package was to spend as much money as he could, as fast as he could, in as wasteful a fashion as he possibly could. Not to create jobs, but to create chaos. That's a fact. If they really wanted to stimulate the economy, they could have done it. All right. Now, what happens? The bubble is going to burst. As you know, many people have prophesied that God has told them that the American economy is going to crash, that the dollar will be utterly worthless. So I got to now keep a list of the videos I said I would link in the description box. So in 2016, I also had a dream, which I made a video about. I will link it in the description box, about how the American economy crashed, and it had to do with student loans. It had to do with the government defaulted on its obligations. And the first place that it was showing was that they failed in the student loan payments. They did not pay the refunds to people for the student loans. So the government defaulted on the student loan program, and the whole economy as a whole was a disaster, and it was getting ready to crash. And they had just abandoned the U.S. economy. The government had just abandoned the economy. They raped it and they left. And they had no intention of paying the obligations that they owe. It was just like the government defaulted. So what does all this mean for us, the New World Order? What should we know? What should we do? It all has to do with something that God said to me, I think in 2017, just 2 words, Agenda 21. So I looked into what was Agenda 21. And I found out Agenda 21 was a plan, a meeting that was put on by the United Nations, the one world government, and it largely includes sustainable development. And all it is really designed to do is get people out of their houses. So, just like the crash of 2008 drained people's retirement accounts to put people in a position where once they put the crunch down on the economy, people would need the government. People would be crying out and telling the government, help me, help me, help me. You know, I know 70-year-olds that are working because they don't have a retirement. Because jobs, you know, they tricked everybody into getting these IRAs to relieve the corporations of having to provide real retirement security for people that work for them. And then they tell you, you know, you have this flexibility. You can put it in this. You can put it in that. You can invest it. You should not invest your retirement. You should save for your retirement if we had time like that. But if you were doing something like that, you don't put your retirement in the stock market. You don't put it into hedge funds, and you just don't do that. You need your money. You want it to be there, and it should be someplace where it cannot be lost that way. That is not smart. People say, oh, you can't just let your money sit there and have it not grow. And that's a waste. But now look, people don't have it. And then money's so tight now, a lot of people can't even afford to begin to resave that money, because things have just gotten tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter as we so-called recovered. Is anybody better off now than they were in 2007? Just look around at the people you know. I don't really know too many people that are truly economically better off than they were in 2007. There are people who are doing okay, but they don't have anything saved. Nothing at all. And they work for jobs that don't have solid retirement accounts. They allow for you to save some, and they'll so-called match it, but it's in places where, again, it could all be lost. And whenever they get ready, they can manipulate the economy to the point where they can pump up something and then drain it. They can pump up a bubble and then drain it to their advantage. And that's exactly what happened to your retirement accounts, your IRAs. And in the meantime, what it did was relieve these corporations of the responsibility to provide for people who worked for them for 25, 30, and more years, which is something that people expect when you dedicate yourself to one company and serve them all that time. So, same thing with the houses. Agenda 21 is a plan to, through the ruse of sustainable development, saving the planet, saving the little black bears and the squirrels and the wilderness from, now we're not polluting the earth. Corporations are polluting the earth. They choose how they make things. We're not choosing how they make those things. I didn't ask you to poison the Cuyahoga River. I didn't tell you to pollute up Lake Michigan to where all the fish are dead and inedible. I never told you to do that. I didn't demand as a consumer that you do that. You did that because it was cheap and easy and because you're full of the devil. Corporations. So sustainable development is a way to trick you into drinking water that used to flow through toilets. Look up Bill Gates and the recycled sewer water, like poopy water, that filtration system that he's advocating, where I guarantee you he did not drink that poop water, where he's sitting there drinking a glass talking about, yeah, this used to be poop water. Watch that. So these are the types of things. So you see in Barack Obama's stimulus package there, he had renewable energy. You know, they gave all these tax credits for Energy Star rated products. And if you, so remember there was a cash for clunkers thing? They would give you money to buy another car, to buy a new car. Who did that benefit? Car companies, not you. Did that benefit the economy? That so-called was supposed to help the economy by giving you a car that took less gas. But they had to destroy a car, put it in a landfill before time when there was nothing wrong with it. And because you had to agree to let your car be destroyed. You couldn't sell your car. Nothing could be done with that car. It had to be destroyed. So that was a waste. And also to use money or to use resources, more pollution to make the new car that you bought. So all this stuff is just hypocritical. If they really cared about the economy, the stuff that they're doing is not helping the economy. Not the economy, the environment. They don't care about the environment. They do not care about the environment. that stuff about the environment, sustainable development, green this and green that, riding bikes and doing all that stuff. All that stuff is just the noble cause that they're going to cram down everybody's throat, because the ultimate goal is to trap everybody into small areas, not small areas, contained areas, like major cities. Like I imagine Atlanta would be one of them, LA, San Francisco, Seattle, New York City, different places. Centers, kind of like that last dream that I had about where the people were going to get their mark of the beast and be filled with this demon spirit and speak in fake tongues. So there were different centers. I knew there were different regional places around the country where you would have to go. So they're going to move people out of rural places and into cities, which has been happening over the last, 100 years. And not just in America, but all over the world. They took people out of the Chinese villages. Indonesia, same thing. These people had a village way of life. They had a sustainable way of life. They caught fish. They lived in villages with huts they made themselves. And they didn't have money, use money, or need money. But through the lure of education for their children and medical care and stuff like that, they were promised all those things and nice apartments. And so they lured all these people into the cities to trap them there to be workers, just to enslave them as workers. And it might not be the type of slavery that you imagine in your mind with people in shackles, but slavery, it only needs to be shackles for a certain period of time until you enslave the mentality. And then once you enslave the mentality and train the people to live under their slavery, you don't have to hold them there. Their way of life perpetuates it. And we are enslaved to technology. We are enslaved due to our dependence. We don't know how to do anything. We don't know how to survive. We don't know how to grow anything. You're not allowed to grow anything. And the people who do live in areas where you would be allowed to grow anything, like take California. You can look at California and you can see what's going to happen everywhere else. They are driving people out of the rural areas and moving them into the cities. No one is allowed to stay in those rural places. If you live in the mountains, if you live in a place where you have a lot of property, even in like, say, Texas and other places that aren't California, fracking has destroyed their wells, their water. So they've had to give up their property anyway. In California, what they're using, the most convenient thing, fires. There used to be a season, the hot, dry season, and that was only some years where it would be bad, where they would have fires. Now they got fires all year round. And they're being purposely set, and they're driving people off their property. They don't want anybody to be sustainable. In all the midst of all this talk about sustainable development, they don't want people to be sustainable. They want people to be dependent. They want you not to know how to do anything. They don't want you to think you can teach your children. They want you to think you need the government school. You need the Federal Reserve notes to do anything. You need the grocery store, and you just need to wait on Big Daddy government to give you your next directions, your next handout. And you might remember, you could look that up, Chris Rock saying, well, if Daddy says we need to do something, that's what we need to do. Talking about Barack Obama. He needed slapped all over his face when he said that. And he's going to get all the Barack Obama he wants. And he's going to follow him to hell. And you might know he recently, within the last couple of years, left his wife, his longtime wife and mother of his 2 daughters. And he followed the spirit of the Antichrist, which God told me, putting away your wife is the spirit of the Antichrist. And so he's fully engulfed by the spirit of the Antichrist. It is extremely wicked to divorce, to put away your wife. It is extremely wicked to abandon the woman that you married with your children. It is, I cannot tell you the depths of the wickedness of that. It is in line with the angels that came down and mated with human women in Genesis chapter 6. That is how the Lord looks down upon the earth and sees these events taking place. The destruction of the family. And it's not like the family is being destroyed by an earthquake or anything. It starts with a man who leaves his wife. And there's some bad wives. Of course there are. But the majority of these things are happening because of unfaithful men. Unfaithful men who won't lead and who are not committed and don't stick it out and are not bearing the burden of the marriage the way a man is called to do. You're called to bear the burden of a marriage. She's called to obey you, and you're called to bear the burden of a marriage. You make a choice who you marry. And if you marry a woman that will not submit to you, you didn't test to see if she would submit to you before you married her. You didn't check with God before you married her. Obviously, you didn't, because did God lie to you? Okay, anyway, Agenda 21. Agenda 21 is the plan through which they will use, saying that they're looking for sustainable development, to say that living in single-family homes, which take up a lot of space, okay, that takes up land and space. And then people have to have cars because these houses need to be spread out. So then you have these highways full of traffic and they're, burning up all this gas, and we can't keep using oil this way, and all that stuff. Oh, the sky is falling. Here comes Al Gore. So they're going to use all those things to frighten everybody and force everyone else who's not falling for it into living in apartments. Not condos. It'll be condos at first. But I'm going to tell you one thing. The houses that are for sale, you do not see very much building of single family homes the way you did prior to 2008. In 2008, when I was looking to buy a home, and I didn't buy until 2009, by 2009, construction had come to a grinding halt. Some of the developments that I was looking to buy in, which remember God told me to buy in this little small condo place that was already done and old, and built in the 90s, and I wanted to buy these brand new places that they were building that were so nice to me. That's what I wanted. But God said no, and it worked out, like I said, probably about an hour ago. So in 2008, they were building because the bubble was still pumping in most areas of the country. It was still pumping. It was falling in California, but it went through the country like a wave. And in my neck of the woods, they were still building. And then in 2008, in the fall of 2008, when everything crashed, I'm going to say in like November, that's when I felt things tighten up. Jobs were gone in the industry that I was in, and I had to stop traveling and take a stay put job to have stability where I could go from job to job was gone. Those jobs dried up. Hospitals stopped employing people in the way that I was employed. And so I had to take a stationary job, which was a big pay cut. And also, I was remarried in 2008. So the guy that I was married to, because we had to move, suddenly here he is trying to have to find a job in a new area. Wasn't going good. It went from where you could just pick up a job anywhere to nothing. I mean, nothing. It was bad. It was really bad. And it was bad because people didn't know how bad it was going to get. And people just stopped spending money. Places just stopped hiring. The economy just tightened up. So unlike this housing bubble, that one was more genuine in that there was building going on. People really believed in the housing market. And that was evidenced by the fact that people thought this was real, evidenced by the fact that they were building homes. So the demand was actually there. The demand for this housing market is artificial. This is how. Because if there really were a shortage of homes, that it was driving up the prices, because remember, you have low supply, you have high demand, that's going to give you high prices. So if they're saying that that's what's driving up the price, is that the supply is low. If the supply is low, build houses. But that's not what's happening. All you see being built is condominiums, where in the same amount of space that you might be able, if you were building single family homes, in the same place where you might build 10 homes, you can now house 1,000 families in the same amount of space, because they want us all in small contained areas where there will be no need for cars, because you're not going to have a car. They're going to, first of all, Ford is stopping building cars. You heard about that? Not SUVs, but cars. And you're going to see more and more of that with other car companies. Car sales are going to go down, and they're going to claim that it's because there's no demand for the cars. People just don't want cars anymore. They just don't need cars anymore because we lived in compact, livable communities. That's what they're pushing. They're pushing places where there's a coffee shop down the street. There's a grocery store, like a nice big Whole Foods in walking distance, and you're bringing your own shopping bags, and you're just being all responsible and keeping your carbon footprint low, and you're just a good citizen of the world. You're just a good UN citizen. And you just are, oh, you're just saving the planet. Meanwhile, they're still polluting all they want. So, no cars. This is Agenda 21. No cars and apartments. First, they're going to be condos. They're not building any houses. So if there was a true housing shortage that was making prices high, then they would be building houses. Because supposedly our economy works on what people want to buy. No, people want to buy homes. Condominiums, frankly, they're not that great because you're going to be controlled by the homeowners association. They're going to tell you what plants you can plant, what color your curtains can be. They're going to hit you with assessments. And in most condominium complexes, you always have an embezzler. Yep, you have an embezzler that's there stealing money from the condominium complex, like the treasurer or the person that's running the management firm that's managing the resources of the condominium. They usually, I'm not going to say usually, but a lot of times there's an embezzler. They're stealing. They never get caught, but they're there. So they always want more and more money, and you don't get anything for it. They send out fines. That place that I lived in 2009, this is what they did. If you left your garbage can out past, I think if your garbage can was out the next day after the garbage people came, then they fined you $50. They fined you $50. Now, that might not sound that bad for every day that it was out. That might not sound that bad. If you live there, yeah, bring your garbage can in. But first of all, that's none of your business. If my garbage can is out, maybe I'm out of town. Maybe, I stayed at work late. Maybe I went and spent the night over, my mom's house or whatever. None of your business what I do with my garbage can. And how dare you? But what about people who were renting their condos? And they had a renter there. They got to drive all the way over there and make sure the renter puts the garbage can in there? Or they got to try to put that $100 or $150 onto the rent? It's just, you have no right to control another person's life like that. And you sign all that away when you agree to move into this condominium. There's no negotiation. Whatever homeowners association is there and whatever rules they have, you agree to abide by them. If you pay your homeowner dues late, which can be excessive, ridiculous, it can be somewhere, if your place is cheap enough, your homeowner's dues every month can be as much as your mortgage. They had this one at this place. They had, if your dues were late, if you didn't pay that month, guess what the fee was? $100. If you didn't have the $250 it cost in the first place, you don't have an extra $100 either. So they would add all that up. Like say you didn't pay it for a few months, all that stuff is adding up. And then when you go to sell your condo, they attach a lien to it and they're going to get that money. All kinds of other ridiculous, you can look into some of the things. There was this old man, I don't even remember what state he was in, but his homeowner association was so out of control. This man tried to put an American flag on the front of his property, an American flag in America. And they charged him some ridiculous amount of money till he ended up owing them thousands of dollars. And they actually tried to foreclose his property to get that money from him. So homeowners associations are totally out of control. They are the ultimate a dictatorial governing body because they just make whatever rules they want to. And when you buy into a property, you buy into their rules. You have no say so in the matter. So be very careful when you move into a condominium complex, because you're going to have a lot of power hungry thieves that are taking those dues. So if you take a condominium complex that, say, if it has 100 units or 200 units, and they're collecting $300 or $400 a month from people, that's a lot of money. Let's say $400, which this is nothing. It can go up from there. And say you have just a small complex, 250 units. That is $100,000 a month by the year. So that is, man, that's $1.2 million a year. And what they pay out of it is, different fees that they may pay out of it. And you don't have any say in it. You can go to the meetings and argue, but they've already decided what all they're going to do behind closed doors with the little people that are on the board. And it's just a lot of foolish politics and favoritism and just dictator-like policies and things that they do. So that $1.2 million and whatever they have left, they can just steal. And I watched this YouTube video about this lady who was embezzling from her neighbors, her friends and neighbors, because she had a place on their condo board, their board of whatever, and they trusted her that she was doing what she was supposed to be doing with the money, and she was just living high on the hog off her friends and neighbors' money. Agenda 21 wants you, it's a UN initiative. You can look it up. It's a real document that was signed by George W. Bush. Not George W. Bush, George Bush, the first George Bush that was president. They met in Rio in 1992. They met and discussed how the United States was so wasteful and how we were ruining the world and how we need to agree to all these initiatives. Agenda 21, agenda for the 21st century. So that's what's happening. These housing bubbles, which are being pumped up by debt, bad loans that are being made into the American economy, spending to get people into debt so that they can take their property, so that you can take a property that they tell you is worth $300,000, get you to borrow $300,000 and say, oops, the bubble burst. You know how the economy goes. These things move in cycles. Now you lose your property. And then so many people lost property in the first wave. Those people were bankrupt, credit ruined. So now with this next wave, it's taking more people's property. And since the education and student loan crisis has been pumped up by yet more of this stimulus bill, you have these young so-called millennials that have graduated from college and are graduating from college without jobs, and they can't even afford to pay attention, let alone buy a house. So all of these people are going to be first pumped into condos because they're not building houses. They're not building homes. They're not even giving, there's a tightening on the issuance of permits to even build homes, because I wondered, where's all the new home construction? Like I can drive a few miles and I can find the places where they were building homes back in 2008, 2009, and the complexes, they're just half finished. Some of them, they went back. Some of them, they went back and started building. But others, you just still see the pipes that were left up there. Meanwhile, next door, there's someone who's been living there this whole time, who cannot sell that place. They either can't sell it or they lose it because it's only worth so much with this dirt lot next to it with pipes sticking out of the ground that they never finished building, or a street that heads nowhere. They live in the middle of a street that goes all the way down to the end and is nothing. So the building stopped, but what they are building is these condos. First, they're going to get people who have money, who can still buy anything, into condos. They're going to make home ownership impossible. And they're going to make owning a condo first preferable. Then once they get people in condos, meanwhile, more people are also filing into apartments. They're going to turn the condos into apartments. I've seen that happen too. So what they're going to do is, I forget how they do it. I forget how that happened with this one lady. They had these luxury condos, and then they couldn't finish selling all of them or something, but something happened where they gave people their money back, or they bought them out somehow and turned the place into rentable condos. I guess, I don't know if they had foreclosures or whatever the problem was. So all these condos are going to have you living in this tiny, small space where your grocery store, your schools, everything is in either a walkable distance or buses or mass transit in some way. Buses, bikes, mass transit, or your good old feet. And that's the way people are going to get around, because everything's going to be in walkable distance. And what they're going to say is, we're not all spread out over the place. And this condo or this stackable living is much more efficient than heating single homes, which is wasteful to build and to live in. This is Agenda 21. This is sustainable development. This is green development. This is low carbon footprint that you keep hearing about, that they're making it sound so noble. And then while you're trying to be noble, why not just be a vegan? Because it's expensive to feed people meat. So they want to get you in as small a place as possible and keep you there as cheaply as possible, as cheaply as humanly possible. This is what they have planned for you. This is what they're going to do. The condos, the houses are gone. Forget your house. And then I just found out today that they have limited a very important tax credit. Houses cost so much in certain areas. There was a place in Oakland, California, $220,000. And this place was something that probably would cost, or like the city might be giving it away for free around here. Because they got places that are so economically depressed that you can literally buy the whole thing for $1 if you agree to fix it up and live in it. But in Oakland, prices are so out of control in California that this place that you could see the roof was open. It was boarded up. The place was a tear down, $220,000 on a very tiny lot. That's the cheapest you could get in, $220,000 for a place that you would have to tear down and start over. So when they took away this tax credit, what it was when you buy a house, you can deduct off your federal income tax the interest that you pay on your mortgage, which is very substantial, especially when you first buy the place. You can deduct, you were able to deduct all of that. And also your property taxes, which can also be very substantial when the property values are very high. An average house out there can cost you $1 million. An average livable house can literally cost you $1 million. So people on an average salaries, the guy that works in Chipotle or a guy that works in Home Depot or a teacher, they can't afford to buy property out there. They took away this tax credit. Donald Trump had some tax cuts. I just found out about this today. And it took effect this year, I guess. And what it is it's limited to, you can deduct now only $10,000, and you can deduct they put the limit on the property at $500,000. You can deduct the interest on your property up to $500,000, and then any value over $500,000 you can't deduct anymore. So they limited the deduction to properties less than $500,000 or the first $500,000 of value. You can deduct the interest, and then the taxes, I think, were limited to $10,000. I think that's how it goes. Don't quote me. You can look it up. So in certain markets where it's nothing for a house to cost $500,000, that's a lot of money to people. A lot of money. Losing that deduction is a lot of money. It could be the difference between getting money back on your taxes and owing money on your taxes, and a nice amount of money. So the net effect of all of these things is to destroy the whole concept of the single family home. You won't have one. They're not building them, and you won't have one. And if there is one, you can't afford it. And for the people who think you're going to go live in the country or up in the mountains, they're going to set your whole area on fire and drive you down to the cities. And then this one guy named Grindall61, I mentioned his channel before because I dreamed about his channel. And he's exposing a lot of these things because he lives in California and he's mad. And he's watching all these things happen. So he makes a lot of videos about the council meetings and all of the underhanded ways that the government is using, even down to the local level, to bring about these things. What it's doing is exposing the agenda of it all, to let you see that these things are not coming out of a natural, organic desire to take care of the land, the economy, or you, or anything else. They are following the script that leads to the footprints that go straight to the door of the UN, and the United States bowing down to the UN like every other country that has anything at all, any people in it, all nations, peoples, and tongues, will be led by the beast. So he's exposing those things. And they had cameras. They are installing cameras in all the areas, the unpopulated and the lesser populated areas. What they're claiming is, we're watching for fires. We're watching for fires so that we can get to them and fight them early. But really, what are they setting those cameras out there for? And we all know about what they're doing with the drones. They're setting those things out there so that they can find people who want to try to escape out of the cities. You're going to have to live in these cities where you can be watched and tagged and monitored and controlled and made to worship the beast and his image and receive his mark in your forehead or your hand. They need to gather people into containable areas. The world is not overpopulated. And where do you see the pollution at? Where everybody is all gathered together. You go to other places and it's still breathable, but they don't want you there. And they're saying that they're trying to save the planet. I can see them now. They want to keep the wildlife alive. They want to save the brown bear and save the poor polar bear. Meanwhile, they're doing all these things to the environment. It's not our lifestyle and how we're living. None of us is in control of how much pollution is released into your local lake. None of us. They're doing all of that. So, the dream that I had on the 15th was the lady saying that the Atlanta housing market was so bad. There were no houses. People weren't talking about getting into houses. It was apartments. Because they're going to run you out of the house into the condos. And from the condos, after they destroy the housing market, which is what they're doing with all these bubbles. Each time one of these bubbles is pumped up, less and less of these people are able to recover and get into houses. People have lost all the value in their homes. When they do that, you're lost all the value in your home. When your home forecloses, your only option will be apartments or condos because they're not building houses. They're getting people out of these homes and they're putting people in condos. And then after they put tolls that I pass, you seen that stuff? Get ready for that. They're going to tax you to death. Get ready for that. You want to drive through Chicago? It's going to take you forever. And if you don't have one of those iPass things, it's going to cost you about $25, $30. And you're going to stop every 2 to 3 miles and give them money just to drive through. And that's Chicago, where they have the zip code 60606. Barack Obama's state. So they're going to make driving very inconvenient, impossible. In 2008, the thing that pushed people over the edge was when gas went up, and they're going to do that again. They're going to pump gas prices up, pump oil up, which is going to make gas unaffordable. Everybody's in these SUVs. So Ford stopped making cars, and now they're about to phase out making their cars, and they're going to only make SUVs. So SUVs use more gas, and they're saying that people don't have a demand for cars. They want SUVs. And so it costs more to fill up an SUV than it does a little car. So when gas goes up again, that's going to be something that is a strain that is going to tip people closer to not being able to afford their home. Then they're going to have interest rates creeping up. The Fed is announcing they're creeping up interest rates, and they're going to do it one more time before the end of this year, and they plan on doing it twice again next year. So each time the interest rate goes up, if you have credit card debt, if you have a home loan that has a variable interest rate, you're going to be taxed a little bit more. Your budget's going to be taxed a little more. If you have student loans that have interest rates that can go up, all these things are going to move to just tip things over. They're going to move to tip things over. And then they're going to have everybody inside the cities where people are apparently going to be happy to go, because in my dream, people were waiting to get an apartment. Not a home, not even a condo, but an apartment. An apartment. They want us living in the smallest possible spaces. just small enough to where maybe people don't kill each other. You don't want to kill all the slaves. You don't kill all of them. And so that was about Atlanta. So I want to read to you. I didn't know anything about the Atlanta housing market. I didn't know if the Atlanta housing market was what. But I know Atlanta is sort of a hotbed type area, or it was a few years ago. So this is from September 5th, 2018. I looked this up for this video. It says, how much longer can Atlanta's hot housing market last? This past July, Atlanta, Georgia's housing market posted an historic high when the metro area's median home price exceeded $250,000 for the first time in history. Where does this latest real estate benchmark leave Atlanta area investors? To answer this question, we must examine not just the latest market statistics, but some broader geographic and economic indicators, employment trends, and types. The Atlanta area economy is incredibly diverse, with healthy subpopulations working in professional and business services, education, health services, government employment, and trade, transportation, and utilities. Job creation is steady, and local universities attract and cultivate STEM talent. So how do they attract people? How are they going to get people into these areas? Jobs. People are going to go where they can work. Those are those areas that had those highest prices being pumped into the houses that were overpriced. Areas where there was high numbers of high-paying jobs. Silicon Valley right now is way overpriced. I watched one YouTube video called The $1 Million Shack, where any little old house costs $1 million. Any little old house. They put their house on the market and they were being purchased sight unseen. As soon as it went on the market, it was snapped straight up. So any areas that they don't want people to stay in, all they do is destroy the industry there. All they do is move the businesses, move them. Everything is so consolidated that they can control things that way. Just move the industry. When the jobs are gone, the people cannot, or a weather disaster, which they can also control. Where's that place? Florida, I guess there was just a hurricane in Florida. There was a man talking about what the banks do. They're quick to announce, oh, we're going to help you guys out. We feel for you people who just lost your homes. This is what we're going to do for you. We're going to offer instant, no questions asked forbearance for those who apply. If your home has been destroyed or you've been displaced or it's been damaged, severely damaged and is not livable due to hurricane damage, you can stop paying your mortgage for up to a year. Now that sounds good. But at the end of that year, you owe every payment that you skipped in one lump sum. So now, what just happened? If you're not living in that home because it's unlivable, you got to live somewhere. So you still have costs. Your job was no doubt in that area. Your job may be devastated. It may never come back. So if you really wanted to do something for these people, I'm not even saying give them the year's worth of payments. Put it on to the end of their loan. Put that year onto the end of their loan. If you were really interested in these people, you still get your money, but make the loan payment, make the loan period 31 years instead of 30, or 16 years instead of 15. They're not interested in helping you. You're still going to get thrown out of that house. Because if you don't have the $1,000, you're definitely not going to have the $12,000 at the end of the 12 months, because your life has been devastated. So they have ways of getting people out of their homes, and then they're going to attract them to the areas that they want them to be in. They're destroying home ownership in many ways. And don't forget the number one plank of communism, which is the government of the New World Order under the UN, communism. I'm going to read you the planks of communism. This is what the world is after. Then I'm going to get off of here. The 10 planks of communism. Ridiculous. Number 1. First, I'm going to read this little intro. Although Marx advocated the use of any means, especially including violent revolution, to bring about socialist dictatorship, he suggested 10 political goals for developed countries, such as the United States. How far has the United States, traditionally the bastion of freedom, free markets, and private property, gone down the Marxist road to fulfill these socialistic aims? You be the judge. The following are Marx's 10 planks from his Communist Manifesto. Number 1, abolition of private property in land and application of all rents of land to public purposes. Abolition of private property. Number 1 agenda. A heavy progressive or graduated income tax. We have that. Abolition of all rights of inheritance. So obviously, if you don't have any private property, you can't pass it on. Confiscation of the property of all immigrants and rebels. Centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with a state capital and an exclusive monopoly. Then it explains here the Federal Reserve System created by the Federal Reserve Act of Congress in 1913 is indeed such a national bank, and it politically manipulates interest rates and holds a monopoly on legal counterfeiting in the United States. This is exactly what Marx had in mind and completely fulfills this plank, another major socialist objective. Yet most Americans naively believe the U.S. of A. is far from a Marxist or socialist nation. At the end of 2015, while Barack Obama was president, God said this to me: the social welfare state, he said, the welfare state is complete. The welfare state is complete. Okay, there's more planks, but the one I wanted to show you and talk about in this thing was abolition of private property and land application of all rents of land to public purposes. So they're going to save all the places for the wildlife. They're going to be no-go zones. You'll have to have special permission to go in or see these. You can kind of see this forming in the, national parks and the wildlife parks where you can't go there and do anything without permission. So they're going to expand those areas, and you'll be living in a small city, just like chickens, and you'll envy the chickens being free range chickens because you won't have enough space for yourself. You won't be able to grow a garden. You'll be dependent on the grocery store, and you'll be too busy slaving away at your job to do it anyway. Okay, the other thing I saw, I don't know if it was a dream or a vision, this was about a week or two ago. I saw a smokestack like a factory would have. And first they had sort of a reddish fire coming out of it, and then it got like white, yellow, then it got like kind of orange, and then it got kind of high yellow, like it was getting hotter. And then I saw like sparks all in the sky and all that stuff. So I don't know what that means, but I thought, this is what I thought, that after wages are destroyed, the standard of living is destroyed, and we become used to this lower standard of living that we are becoming used to now. You know how people say they're trying to turn the United States into a third world nation? That is what's going to happen. After they do that, guess what they're going to do? Then they'll bring the jobs. They'll bring the factories back. Then they'll bring the factories back when wages are low here. When wages are low. Because all the curses that God said would follow a nation that forgot him are what's going to happen to us. You work hard and bring in little instead of bringing in much. You look for much, and lo, it was little, and all that stuff. Cursed is your basket. Cursed is your store. Cursed is the fruit of your womb. Your wife will sleep with other men. All those curses, we have those here. And the United States is judged and it will not be turned away. It will not be turned away. America will not repent. The New World Order is coming. So if the economy is going to crash, if the housing market is going to crash, what can you do about it? Oh, do you sell your property? I wouldn't suggest you go buy any property right now unless you're going to get it below that price, and be prepared to let it go when the time comes. Because this cannot be stopped. You can't go buy gold and silver. The Bible says your gold and silver will be worthless. It won't help you. It won't help you. God bless.